My son brazenly sold my house for $850,000 without telling me anything, then handed me a check for a measly $12,000 and cynically said, "Go find yourself a room in some cheap place outside Houston." He thought he was dealing with a helpless old man, and I laughed in his face. He had no idea what I had prepared just days before. I'm Caleb Thompson, 68 years old, and let me tell you how my own flesh and blood tried to throw me away like yesterday's garbage. The front door slammed shut with a force that made my old house shake on its foundation. Mason stood in my living room, his expensive leather briefcase catching the afternoon sun streaming through the windows I'd cleaned that very morning. His dark suit probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months, and his Italian leather shoes clicked against the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself just 2 years ago. I sold the house. 4 words that hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. No hello, no explanation, just a cold statement delivered with the same tone he might use to order coffee. I looked up from my newspaper, the crossword puzzle half finished, still trying to process what he'd said. The words seemed to hang in the air between us like smoke. "What do you mean, sold?" Mason's jaw tightened as he pulled out a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase. The papers rustled like dried leaves as he dropped them on my coffee table, right on top of the puzzle I'd been working on for the past hour. His gold watch caught the light as he reached for his Mont Blanc pen. "The deed's already transferred. Settlement was yesterday morning. I've prepared everything you need to know." His voice carried that same cold efficiency he used with his engineering clients, like I was just another project to be managed and completed. My hands trembled as I reached for the papers. The letterhead read, "Southwest Texas Realty" in bold blue letters. Below it, stamped in red ink, "Final sale agreement, 2847 Oak Street, Houston, Texas." My address. My home for 30 years, where I'd raised him alone after his mother died when he was just 12 years old. "Mason, this is my house. You can't just—" "I can, and I did," he interrupted, checking his Rolex with that same dismissive gesture I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. "I'm the legal owner, remember? You signed it over to me 5 years ago for tax purposes. Your accountant recommended it for estate planning." The memory hit me like a physical blow. I'd trusted him completely back then, believed every word when he promised nothing would change. "It's just paperwork, Dad," he'd said with that charming smile. "Just a way to save on taxes when the time comes. Nothing else changes. Just paperwork." Those words echoed in my head now like a death sentence. "But you promised—" I said a lot of things. Mason pulled out his checkbook, the leather cover worn smooth from years of use. "Look, I'm not completely heartless here. I'm giving you $12,000 to help with your transition." He tore off the check with a sharp ripping sound that seemed to slice through the silence, then placed it on top of the legal documents like he was doing me the favor of a lifetime. The pale blue paper seemed to mock me, the amount written in his precise engineer's handwriting, $12,000. For the house where he'd taken his first steps, where I'd stayed up countless nights when he had fever, where I'd helped him with homework at this very kitchen table, where I'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities I never had growing up poor in East Texas. "There's a place Madison found for you on the outskirts of Houston," Mason continued, his tone suggesting he was being remarkably generous. "It's a small apartment, 1 bedroom, but the rent's cheap. Perfect for someone in your situation." "My situation?" The words came out as barely a whisper. I felt like I was drowning, like the room was spinning around me. "Come on, Dad. Be realistic here." Mason snapped his briefcase shut with a metallic click that sounded like a prison door closing. "You're 68 years old, retired, living on Social Security checks. You can't maintain this place anymore. The roof needs major work. The plumbing's from the 1980s. The electrical system's a fire hazard waiting to happen. This way, you get a fresh start without all the financial burden." Burden. That word hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me, like the ground itself was shifting. "This house isn't a burden. It's my home. It's an expense you can't afford," Mason said, straightening his tie with that same gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was lying about something he'd broken or some trouble he'd gotten into at school. "Madison and I have been discussing this situation for months now. We both agree it's the best solution for everyone involved." Madison. Of course his wife was behind this scheme. She'd been pushing him to distance himself from me ever since they got married 8 years ago. I'd seen it in her cold blue eyes at every family dinner, every holiday gathering we'd shared. The way she calculated everything, looked at my possessions like she was already dividing them up in her mind, planning how to liquidate what she saw as unnecessary assets. How exactly does throwing your father out of his home benefit everyone? My voice was rising now, 30 years of suppressed frustration and disappointment breaking through like water bursting through a dam. Mason's expression didn't change one bit. If anything, he seemed bored by my emotional response, like this was just another tedious business meeting he had to endure. "You're being dramatic, Dad. It's a straightforward business decision. The house sold for $850,000. After paying off your remaining mortgage of about $50,000 and covering closing costs and realtor fees, we netted approximately $780,000. I'm giving you $12,000 of that total. That's more than generous, considering the circumstances." Generous I could, feel my face burning with anger and humiliation, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "You're stealing my home, keeping over $750,000 for yourself, giving me less than 2% of the proceeds, and you call that generous? You're getting a place to live and cash in hand without any of the maintenance headaches or property tax obligations," Mason replied with that same infuriating calm. "Most people in your position would be grateful for this kind of practical solution." Grateful. The word tasted like poison in my mouth. After everything I'd done for him, after working 2 jobs for years to pay for his engineering degree at Texas A&M, after going without vacations, new clothes, decent meals so he could have piano lessons and soccer camps and every advantage money could buy. After spending every penny I earned and every moment of free time I had to make sure he never wanted for anything, never had to struggle the way I did growing up. "I sacrificed everything for you." The words exploded out of me like steam from a pressure cooker. "Everything I had, everything I was, everything I could have been, and this is how you repay me?" For the first time, Mason showed actual emotion. But it wasn't remorse or shame or even acknowledgement. It was irritation, pure and simple. "That was your choice, Dad. I never asked you to sacrifice anything. Those were decisions you made on your own. The callousness of it took my breath away." "You ungrateful." I stopped myself, breathing hard, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Get out," I said quietly. "Fine." Mason picked up his briefcase with the same casual confidence he'd entered with, completely unmoved by my anger or pain. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The new owners want possession by the end of March, and they're not interested in any delays." He walked toward the front door with those expensive shoes clicking against my hardwood floors, pausing only to look back over his shoulder with what might have been pity on someone capable of genuine human emotion. "Oh, and Dad, try to be practical about this whole situation. Fighting it won't change anything. The papers are already signed, the money's already been transferred. It's done." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded more final than if he'd slammed it. Through the window, I watched him climb into his BMW sedan, the engine purring to life like a satisfied cat. He didn't look back at the house, our house, my house, as he pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down Oak Street. I sank back into my recliner, staring at the check in my trembling hands. $12,000. The amount stared back at me from that pale blue paper, mocking everything I'd built and sacrificed over the decades. It was less than I used to make in a single week, back when I was actively building my empire. Back when Mason was in diapers and had no idea his poor daddy was quietly constructing something he couldn't even imagine. See, what Mason didn't understand, what he'd never bothered to ask about or investigate, was that I'd been expecting this betrayal for exactly 1 week, the morning of April 15th to be precise. I'd been in my kitchen making my usual breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast when his voice drifted through the thin walls from the living room. He was on my couch, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in that conspiratorial whisper people use when they think they're completely alone and safe from discovery. "No, Madison, he won't see this coming at all." The old man's completely clueless about his own financial situation. I'd frozen in place, the spatula halfway to turning my eggs, my blood running cold as I realized what I was hearing. Getting rid of him is absolutely the smart move here. We take the house, set him up in some cheap apartment, and finally stop carrying this dead weight around our necks. Dad's become a financial liability we simply can't afford anymore. Dead weight. My own son. The boy I'd raised with my own two hands, discussing my disposal like I was a piece of broken furniture cluttering up his life. Trust me on this. He'll actually be grateful when it's all over. We'll frame it as us helping him simplify his complicated life. 12,000 should definitely keep him quiet and cooperative. Hell, that's probably more cash than he's seen in one place in years. Madison's voice crackled through the speaker, though I couldn't make out her specific words from where I stood frozen in my kitchen. But I could hear the tone, calculating, cold, entirely focused on the logistics of my elimination. Exactly right. Once we get this house situation cleaned up, we can start working on getting power of attorney over his other affairs. Who knows what kind of debts and financial messes he's hiding that we'll need to deal with eventually. Mason's laugh was sharp and bitter. The house sale closes next Tuesday. We'll present it to him as a done deal, give him that token payment to keep things civil, and have him moved out before he can cause any real problems or start asking too many questions. That sleepless night, I'd stared at my bedroom ceiling until dawn, my mind racing through options and possibilities. But by the time morning light started filtering through my curtains, I knew exactly what had to be done. My son wanted to play hardball with his old man? Fine. He was about to learn that his helpless father had been playing chess while Mason was still learning checkers. First thing that next morning, I called Wesley Brooks. We'd been doing business together for over 20 years, ever since I'd started my first major expansion beyond the original laundromat I'd opened in downtown Houston back in 1985. Wesley had helped me structure every acquisition, every business formation, every legal protection I'd carefully constructed over nearly 4 decades of building my empire. "Caleb, you sounded pretty concerned on the phone yesterday," Wesley said as I settled into the familiar leather chair across from his mahogany desk. His office smelled of expensive coffee and old law books, the kind of place where serious business got handled quietly and efficiently. "What's going on that's got you worried?" "I need to protect my assets from potential family interference, Wesley. Someone very close to me is planning to take advantage of what they believe is my financial vulnerability and lack of business sophistication." Wesley raised an eyebrow but didn't press for specifics. That was one of the many reasons I'd trusted him with my business for 2 decades. He knew when to ask questions and when to simply solve problems. For the next 2.5 hours, we worked through comprehensive documentation. Asset protection trusts, business ownership verification, updated corporate structures, clear legal barriers preventing any family member from accessing or claiming any part of my carefully constructed holdings without my explicit written consent. This creates what's essentially an impenetrable legal fortress around your primary business assets, Wesley explained as he slid the final documents across his desk for my signature. No one can touch your laundromat empire or personal investment holdings without going through multiple layers of legal protection. Even immediate family members would need to mount years of expensive legal challenges that would ultimately cost them far more than they could ever hope to recover. I signed every document with steady hands, knowing I was building defenses that Mason and Madison would never be able to breach, no matter how clever they thought they were being. "Is there anything else you need me to prepare while we're handling these protections?" Wesley asked, clearly sensing there was more to this story than simple asset protection. "Not yet," I told him, shaking his hand as I prepared to leave. "But I have a feeling I might need your services again very soon." The next 3 days passed in a strange kind of calm before the storm. I went through my normal routines, reading the morning paper, working in my small garden, maintaining the house that would soon no longer be mine legally. But underneath that facade of normalcy, I was making careful preparations for what I knew was coming. I spent hours going through old financial records, calculating exactly how much I'd invested in Mason over the years. The numbers were staggering when I laid them all out in black and white. College tuition at Texas A&M, $180,000 over 4 years. The business startup loan I'd given him when he launched his engineering consulting firm, $75,000 that had never been repaid. Annual Christmas gifts of $15,000 for the past 15 years. Another $225,000. Free housing in my home until he was 35 years old, which at Houston market rates represented roughly $480,000 in saved rent and utilities. Conservative estimate, I'd invested nearly $1 million in Mason's life, education, and career success. His gratitude for that investment was apparently worth exactly $12,000 and a one-way ticket to some discount apartment complex. When Mason's Honda finally pulled into my driveway that Friday afternoon, he'd traded in his BMW by then, though I didn't know the full extent of his financial problems yet. I watched from my kitchen window with the calm satisfaction of a chess grandmaster who'd anticipated his opponent's next 3 moves. This time, instead of barging in like he owned the place, he actually knocked on the door. Even through the wood, I could hear something different in the way he carried himself. "Dad." His voice carried none of the arrogance and cold confidence from our last encounter. Can we talk for a few minutes?" I opened the door to find a man I barely recognized as the successful engineer who'd dismissed me as dead weight just 5 days earlier. Mason's usually perfect hair was disheveled, sticking up in places like he'd been running his hands through it. His expensive dress shirt was wrinkled and looked like it hadn't been changed in days. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands shook slightly as he raised them. "Of course, son. Come on in." Mason settled onto the same couch where he'd once sat smugly explaining my disposal to his wife. But now he fidgeted constantly with his wedding ring, his leg bouncing with nervous energy like a man waiting for terrible news from his doctor. I got a call from First National Bank on Tuesday morning. The words came out in a rush, like he'd been rehearsing them. They want the full loan amount for my office building, immediately. All $200,000 of it. I raised my eyebrows in what I hoped looked like mild surprise, though inside I felt a surge of satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place exactly as I'd hoped they would. "That seems very unusual, Mason. Banks don't typically call in loans that are current on their payments. That's what I thought too." Mason rubbed his face with both hands, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. But they said there were serious concerns about my character and business judgment. Something about recent behavior patterns that made them question my reliability as a borrower. They're demanding full repayment within 30 days, or they'll begin immediate foreclosure proceedings on my office building. Character concerns. I kept my tone carefully neutral, like a concerned father hearing troubling news for the first time. That's quite serious. Did they give you any specifics about what triggered this review? Mason shook his head miserably. They wouldn't say much, just mentioned that information had come to their attention about my personal conduct and family relationships. They said it raised red flags about my overall judgment and integrity. The conversation I'd had with Harrison Campbell at First National had been brief and professional. Harrison had been managing my business accounts for over 15 years, watching me make weekly deposits of $50,000 to $70,000 from my various laundromat locations. When a valued client like me expresses concerns about a family member's character, particularly someone who owes the bank $200,000, those concerns tend to get serious attention. "You know, Harrison," I'd said during our meeting, "my son Mason believes I'm a poor retiree barely scraping by on Social Security. Yesterday, he informed me that caring for his aging father had become too much of a financial burden. He's arranged to relocate me to budget housing so he can liquidate what he sees as my assets." Harrison's expression had shifted from friendly interest to professional concern. "That's troubling, Caleb. Character is certainly a significant factor we consider in our ongoing lending relationships. Mason views family obligations as expensive liabilities to be eliminated through strategic planning," I'd continued. "He referred to me as dead weight that was dragging down his financial position. It makes me wonder about his approach to other obligations and commitments." Now, watching Mason crumble in my living room, I could see that conversation bearing its intended fruit. "The expansion project I told you about last year," Mason continued, his words tumbling out faster now. "The new equipment, the premium office space in downtown Houston, all of it was supposed to triple my revenue within 18 months. I leveraged everything I had to make it happen. The monthly loan payments were completely manageable when my major clients were paying their invoices on time." He stood up and began pacing to the window, the same window where he'd once stood confidently explaining my disposal. "But 3 of my biggest contracts fell through in February. The oil and gas sector took a hit, and suddenly companies that owed me $80,000 were filing for bankruptcy protection. Just like that, my cash flow disappeared." The irony was absolutely delicious. Mason had calculated my worth at $12,000, and now he needed more than 16 times that amount to save his business and his marriage. "I've sold everything valuable I own," Mason said, pressing his forehead against the glass like a man watching his life slip away. "The Rolex you gave me for my college graduation, Madison's diamond jewelry, her car, even my vintage guitar collection. I've managed to raise about $30,000, but that still leaves me $170,000 short with less than 3 weeks to find it. What about Madison? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Mason's laugh was bitter and hollow. Madison's talking about filing for divorce. She said she didn't sign up to be married to a failure who can't provide basic financial security. She's given me until the end of this month to fix everything, or she's moving back to Dallas with her sister. I watched my son fall apart. This man who'd dismissed me as a burden just days earlier now experiencing what true desperation felt like. She cleaned out our joint savings account yesterday, Mason continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. Said she needed to protect herself financially before I dragged her down with me. 22 years together, Dad. We met in college, built our whole adult life together, and she's walking away like I'm some stranger she's embarrassed to know. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Mason turned back to face me, hope and desperation warring in his expression. Dad, I know I hurt you terribly with how I handled the house situation. I realize now that I was completely insensitive about your feelings and your attachment to this place. Insensitive. As if stealing my home and calling me dead weight was merely poor etiquette. I'm asking for your help, and I know I don't deserve it. I know you don't have much in savings, but if you could loan me whatever you can manage, I'll pay you back with interest. I'll put it all in writing, make it completely legal, whatever terms you want. The desperation in his voice was absolute and genuine. Mason was offering to formalize the very kind of family obligation he'd recently described as dead weight, dragging down his financial position. The silence stretched between us as Mason waited, searching my face for any sign of sympathy or willingness to help save him from the consequences of his own choices. No. The word came out flat and final, like a judge pronouncing sentence. Mason blinked hard, as if he'd misheard me. No? I don't have the resources to help you with this kind of financial crisis, son. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my shirt with deliberate calm. As you recently explained to me, I'm just a poor retiree living on Social Security checks. $12,000 was more money than I'd seen in years, remember? Those were your exact words. The color drained completely from Mason's face as his own cruel words came back to haunt him like a boomerang. But Dad, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, Mason. I walked toward the front door, my movement making it clear this conversation was over. You're in exactly the same position you put me in just 5 days ago. The only difference is that nobody's offering you pocket change to ease your transition into poverty. Mason followed me to the door, his professional composure finally cracking completely. Please, Dad, you're my father. You're the only person left in the world who might be willing to help me. I opened the door, letting the cool evening air flow into the house. You made it crystal clear that our relationship was purely a business transaction to be optimized for your benefit. You terminated that relationship when it became inconvenient. Now you'll need to find other business solutions. Dad, please, I'm begging you. Goodbye, Mason. For the next week, I watched Mason's Honda drive slowly past my house twice every day, like he was hoping to catch some sign that I might change my mind about helping him. But I had other plans brewing. Plans that would teach him lessons no amount of money could buy. Sunday afternoon seemed perfect for the next phase of my son's education. I called Mason at noon that Sunday. Son, would you like to take a drive with me this afternoon? There's something important I want to show you. His voice carried desperate hope mixed with confusion. Of course, Dad. Absolutely. Whatever you want. 30 minutes later, Mason sat in my passenger seat as we drove toward the industrial district on Houston's south side. He kept stealing nervous glances at me, probably wondering if this meant some kind of reconciliation might be possible, if his old man had finally decided to help him after all. Where exactly are we going? He asked as we turned onto Commerce Boulevard, passing warehouses and manufacturing facilities. You'll see soon enough. The large blue sign came into view first. Thompson's Premium Laundromat, family-owned since 1985. Mason's eyes widened as he read our family name, then flicked to me with growing confusion and something that might have been hope. Dad, there's someone with our last name who... No, Mason, I interrupted gently, pulling into the manager's parking space directly in front of the main entrance. There isn't someone else. There's just me. Garcia Rodriguez. My site manager for the past 8 years approached my car with his usual professional smile and genuine warmth. "Mr. Thompson, good to see you today, sir. Everything's running perfectly as always." Mason's mouth fell open as Garcia addressed me with obvious familiarity, respect, and the kind of deference usually reserved for someone who signs the paychecks. "Everything looks excellent, Garcia. This is my son, Mason. I thought I'd give him a comprehensive tour of our operation here." "Wonderful to meet you, Mason. Your father's built something truly special with this business. We're processing about 600 loads daily now, and customer satisfaction is at an all-time high. 600 loads at an average of $10 per load meant $6,000 in daily revenue from this single location." Mason's engineering brain was obviously working overtime, calculating numbers that didn't match his image of his poor, struggling father. As we walked toward the facility entrance, the operation hummed with the kind of efficient precision that only comes from decades of refinement and proper management. 20 industrial washers and dryers operated simultaneously in perfect coordination, while teams of uniformed employees handled customer service, equipment maintenance, and quality control with practiced professionalism. Electronic displays throughout the facility showed real-time operational metrics, revenue tracking, customer satisfaction scores, equipment performance data, energy efficiency ratings. This wasn't some mom-and-pop operation struggling to pay the bills. This was a sophisticated business running like a Swiss watch. "This is really impressive, Dad," Mason managed, watching a customer load commercial-grade linens into one of our premium machines. "I had no idea you were involved in something like this. We've been perfecting this process for nearly 40 years, I explained calmly, like I was discussing the weather. "Started with one small location in downtown Houston back in 1985. Added 2 more by 1990, then expanded systematically across Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and eventually throughout Texas." Mason stopped walking entirely. "Expanded to how many total locations?" I pulled out my smartphone, opening the business management application that tracked all 32 sites in real time. Revenue numbers, customer counts, operational status, maintenance schedules, everything displayed in neat, organized columns of data that told the story of a thriving enterprise. 32 locations currently, from Houston to El Paso, with heavy concentrations in every major Texas metropolitan area. I handed him the phone so he could see the numbers for himself. Each location generates between $5,000 and $8,000 daily, depending on location demographics and seasonal factors. Mason stared at the screen in absolute shock, his face growing pale as he scrolled through the financial summary. Daily network revenue, $192,000. Weekly totals in the millions. Annual gross revenue approaching $25 million. You own all of these?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Built them one location at a time over 38 years. Never took outside investors. Never borrowed beyond initial equipment financing that was always paid off within 18 months per location." I retrieved my phone, closing the app with the same casual gesture I might use to check the weather. Complete self-funded expansion using reinvested profits and careful market analysis. But how? I mean, you always seemed so... Seemed what, son? Poor? Struggling financially? I gestured toward the bustling operation surrounding us, the steady stream of customers, the obvious prosperity of a well-run business. I dressed simply, drove modest cars, lived in the same house for 3 decades. None of that prevented me from building this empire. Mason leaned against a concrete support pillar, looking like he might actually be sick. "When I came to you begging for help with that $200,000, you could have written that check without even thinking about it." Without even thinking about it, I confirmed calmly. I could have written 10 such checks if it had been necessary. 20, if I'd wanted to liquidate some investment positions. The silence stretched between us as Mason processed the full magnitude of what he was discovering. His father, the man he'd dismissed as dead weight, the poor retiree he'd planned to warehouse in budget housing while keeping $750,000 from his house sale, owned a business empire worth tens of millions of dollars. "Why didn't you ever tell me about this?" he whispered, genuine anguish in his voice. "Why would I, Mason? You never asked about my work, never showed any interest in my life beyond what I could provide for your immediate needs. You assumed poverty based on my appearance and lifestyle, then used that assumption to justify treating me like an expensive liability to be eliminated." Mason's legs seemed to give out entirely. He slid down the pillar until he was sitting on the concrete floor, head buried in his hands like a man who'd just realized he'd thrown away everything that mattered. 3 weeks later, Mason knocked on my door again. But this wasn't the arrogant businessman who'd sold my house, or the desperate supplicant begging for money. This was a man who'd spent weeks thinking about what kind of person he'd become and what kind of person he wanted to be. "Dad, I don't want your money. I don't want your business connections. I don't even want you to solve my problems." His eyes were clear and honest in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. "I just want my father back. I want the chance to be the son you deserved all along." 6 months later, Mason was working as a maintenance supervisor at my Westheimer location, earning $18 an hour and learning the value of honest work. Madison had filed for divorce, but Mason seemed relieved rather than devastated. He'd found something worth more than her approval, self-respect earned through genuine effort. "You know what the crazy part is, Dad?" Mason said as we closed up the facility one evening. "I'm happier now than I've been in years. This work means something. These people respect me because I've earned it, not because of who I married or what I own." A year later, I offered Mason a partnership in the business. Not because he was my son, but because he'd proven himself worthy of the Thompson name through character and dedication. "You're giving me everything I tried to steal from you," he said, signing the partnership agreements with Wesley Brooks. "No, son. I'm giving you the chance to earn what you never could have stolen. The business will be yours someday, but only because you've become the man who deserves it." That night, as we celebrated at dinner, Mason raised his glass. To the best father a man could have, and to second chances earned the hard way. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them fall far enough to discover who they really are, underneath all the success and pretense. My son had to lose everything to find himself, but in the end, we both gained something more valuable than money. We got our family back. And that $12,000 check? It's framed in my office now, a reminder that the most important lessons in life can't be bought at any price.